also really bad at all things Zoom related, so this has been quite traumatic for me, but I gotten through it.
No one's actually good at Zoom. Zoom is just a blight.
So true.
All right, we're live.
Excellent. Cool. For those of us on the Zoom, we're just going to wait till 5 past to get started, but welcome back, and I hope you're all excited for Dev Seminar 3 on case building. I'll be back to talk to you in a minute or so. Okay, we are at 5 past, so we'll get started. For those of you that haven't come to a development seminar before or have been to one when I was online, I'm Melissa. I'm the development officer for UOA DevSoc, and this week the first 2 seminars have been on introducing everyone to what's debating and what's judging at university. If you guys didn't catch those, they should be still up on the UOA DevSoc Facebook page, and you can watch them if you are interested in hearing more about that. But today we are going to introduce everyone to case building. So just a little bit of a rundown on how you should approach prep, both as a team and as an individual speaker. So getting into it. Hopefully, there we go, I can change slides. So just a general flag, I think lots of people think that case building is just about something that first speakers should do, or something that only one person in the team should be delegated to do. But I think the priority should actually be for everyone to involve themselves in putting out the best case. So just a general few tips before we launch into the seminar. Make sure that you're not hoarding ideas. If you are in prep in club night or any other time that you're doing debating, even if you think your idea is dumb, put it out on the table so that you guys can have the potential to get the best case possible. And just remember that, like everyone always says, everyone else will be thinking that their own ideas are dumb as well. So just make sure that even if you're hesitant to say something or you're not sure about an idea, just put it out there, and it will probably be relevant in some respect, even if it's not in the way that you originally thought it was. Cool, so we're gonna start quite basically with prep. So how to get from a motion, so something like a literal sentence that we've given you, that's gonna be what the debate is about, to an actual fully fleshed out case or a speech. So in terms of a prep timeline, what you should start and aim with doing in most scenarios in the 3v3 format that we do at club nights, prep will be 30 minutes. So here's just a little bit of an outline on how it will be easiest to split up your time. So for the first 5 minutes, it's really good idea to give yourself that time to silently or just in your own head process what the motion means, process what thoughts you might have about it, and just brainstorm. So jot your ideas down on what you think the debate will be about. For the next 10 to 15 minutes, team discussions. So the goal there is to agree on a case. So you want to take all of those ideas that you came up with individually, share those with your teammates. So go around one at a time, say, okay, these are the ideas that I came up with, see how they're different, see how they're similar. And from there, you guys want to build towards bringing the ideas that you have similarly onto a piece of paper so that you have them ready to flesh out later on. For the next 5 minutes, you want to help your speaker set up the case for their speech. So that's when everyone's workshopping, okay, here's the context for the case, here are the mechanisms, walking through making that first speaker speech quite fleshed out. Then for the final 5 minutes, you want to go over the case all together. So what you've got as a whole, even if your first speaker is still writing, I think it's very important that you guys are all on the same page as a team. So you know what your first speaker is going to talk about before they get up there, so that you can use that as a lens to look at the debate. So you're reminding yourself when you're a second or third speaker that that's the kind of things that you want to bring back or make relevant again or make most important. So when you're in that individual brainstorm, here are some kinds of questions to ask yourself that can help prompt you to think of relevant things to debate. So I think that the obviously most important thing to think about is, who does this topic affect? Does it affect these actors in different ways? Because when you think about the different groups of people that it impacts, then you can start to think of, like, are these going to emerge into different points? When there are multiple groups of people that it impacts, that's when it's easier to look at different ways that changing something or whatever the motion's requiring can change things, impact those people. So then, most importantly, when you're breaking down the motion, you want to be thinking of, what is this motion requiring or asking of our team? So if it's like this house would, or this house should, you're probably looking at changing something. So it's most likely going to be in the form of like a policy proposal or a model. So a model is just when you're giving some kind of like metric by which you should evaluate the debate. So we think that if the debate is about introducing a new tax, that's when you would kind of give, okay, this is how much we think the tax should be, so that you can make the debate a lot clearer, so that both teams are aware of what the debate is about, or how large the tax that they're arguing about is going to be. Then you kind of want to think about things like, what do you need to do to prove that you're winning? So in terms of logic and impact, what are the arguments that you are going to bring that are going to make you win the debate, or make you seem more important in the debate, and therefore you're winning? Then there are some just lots more questions. I think we'll move on from here, but there's lots and lots of things that you can do to prompt yourself to think of ideas. Even if you do get stumped, just keep asking yourself questions related to the motion, because that will help you come up with ideas, and you as a team can move that into a speech, more specifically in terms of its relevance. So then if you can't think of anything, even if you've asked yourself all of these questions and you've literally just drawn a blank, you cannot think of anything, think of questions to ask your teammates. So what is unclear to you about the debate? What context do you need to understand the debate? Is it economics motion and you don't know what a economics niche word is? Probably someone in your team might know, so it's a good idea to ask them. Even if you aren't quite sure what a certain meaning of a word is in a motion, what you can do still is infer the meaning. So if you obviously you'd use the inferring skills quite often otherwise, because even if you don't quite get the meaning of the word right, the brainstorming that you do based on the inferred meaning of the word is still going to help you get into the right mindset to think about all of the ideas that your teammates are bringing. And worst case scenario, you get emotion and you're like, damn, I cannot think of a neg, I can only think of an F. You can still brainstorm that F, but it's going to be helpful for your teammate to be aware of the arguments that the other team will bring, so that you can preempt them in your own case. Okay, so once you've gone through that 5 minutes of either you've got so many ideas, so excited, or you're just in turmoil because you can't think of anything, either way, you get to the end of that 5 minutes and it's time for team sharing. So I think it's very important that every team member should have 1 to 2 minutes of uninterrupted time to share their ideas. Make sure that you show respect to your teammates and give them the opportunity to get their own ideas out there without being interrupted. So when you're giving that 1 to 2 minutes, do try to keep it brief so everyone has an equal time to share and you guys still have enough time to get through everything else. You should give an overview of your thoughts. So you don't need to give the most detailed version of all the ideas that you have, but you want to try and give an overview of what kinds of things you think that you need to prove to win the debate, what kinds of necessary context there might be in the debate, or maybe you've thought of some really cool examples that you think will be really helpful for your team. Give an overview of what you have. However, you should share things that you think are really, really important. So if you're getting to the end of your 2 minutes and you think that you need to add something else and really important, you should give more specific details if you think that they're like vital to your contextualizing the case that you guys are going to create. After that, however many, like 6 to 8 minutes that everyone's taken to share, when everything's on the table, what you guys want to look at is where your ideas come together, where they are different, what things amongst all of everything that people have put out on the table, what things are going to help you win the debate. So think about scale, think about the people involved, think about the impact that the kind of ideas that this has, and then from there it'll become a little bit clearer about the groups of where points start to emerge. So it's important at this stage, if your first speaker is quite good at taking notes, I think it's wise if the first speaker, while everyone is sharing, jots down everything that they say. So you have on a piece of paper or across a couple pieces of paper, a big pool of ideas to draw from when you're building the case. After you've done team sharing, your first speaker's got a big wad of notes of all of the ideas that you have. You want to start grouping it into like a skeleton of the first speech. So I think it helps at this point to separate ideas out onto different pieces of paper. So for one entire piece of paper, you want to leave space for an introduction. So that introductory page will be a little bit of leave space for a paragraph of what you'll introduce your speech in. So that's like a 20-second introduction where you'll like maybe bring an example into the debate or explain the context of the world to explain how the debate is relevant in today's world. Then underneath that, you want to leave room for like just labeling first point, second point, third point, and then also leave room for any like setup or important modeling or important context that you want to put at the start of your speech before you launch into any substantive points. That's one piece of paper or two pieces of paper, depending on how big you write or what kind of space you want to leave. On a new piece of paper, that's when you want to get down all of the more concentrated model or setup material. So what context do you need to make the debate work? Like the government should increase interest on student loans of graduates that leave the country. Here is where you would need to model in a reasonable tax rate. So explain what you think the tax rate should be and why that tax rate is reasonable at this portion of the debate. Note that depending on what the debate is, you'll need less or more room or less or more detail in the context. So this is where on some debates, you can probably fit that context or the model on the first piece of paper. And other debates where it's quite specific that you need to set what you're changing or set what the tax rate is, that's when you need to give a little bit more room for yourself so you can explain why it's reasonable. And then in just more general debates, probably the only kind of context or clarification that you'll need to do is just clarifying where you think the debate takes place. So is this about private companies? Is this about public companies? Is this about a certain group in society? Just giving a little bit more context to the debate so that it gives a bit more insight into why your points explain things in an order that they do. So then once you've done that kind of first 1 to 2 pages, you'll then start to move into your substantive points. So group the ideas in your notes into points and then write the title of each point onto new pieces of paper. So we're going to move through the rest of this seminar explaining what those points are, how you group them and how you write them. But just as a general explanation, every single point that you're writing should be on a different piece of paper, because if you have them coming into the same piece of paper, it's quite hard mentally when you're thinking about explaining things thoroughly to separate them out in your mind. I think mentally it just helps everyone to have them on separate pieces of paper so that once you've moved one to the side, you've thrown it away or whatever, you're moving on to another piece of paper. So you mentally have to signal to yourself, okay, I'm talking about something different. So fourthly, now you've given the skeleton of the first speech. So this is kind of the next, you've just done 15 minutes of prep, you have talked to each other, you've brainstormed, you've come to a conclusion that these are the different areas in the debate. What you're going to do now is start to flesh out those individual points that you've come up with as a team. So as a general rule, I think it's quite good if you follow this structure. There are many, many variations out there, but this is, I think, the most common one at the moment. So you want to start with the context. So context is what is happening in the world that frames the point. So is there a war going on? Is it particularly relevant because of COVID-19? Like, what are the topical things going on that explain, you know, what you're going to launch into and how what you're going to launch into next is relevant to the debate and to the world. Next, you want to move into mechanisms. So here is where you start to prove what you're trying to prove. So what you're doing here is building reasons why you get to your end goal. So why do people think a certain way? Why does this happen in this way we say it happens? Why is this true? After you've gotten through the mechanism, so this is the, you've just proven why something happens. What you want to do then is move into the outcomes of that. So what happens as a result of those things being true? What happens as a result of people thinking a certain way? So that's when you're just walking through, okay, for students, this means this. For teachers, this means this. So explaining the things that happen in the debate. Then I think a really important part in where you start to win things conclusively is when you do the impact at the end. So here you're explaining why the outcome that you've just done, which is a result of your mechanism, is important. So the mechanisms, students think this way. The outcome is then this happens to students as a result of the way they think. The impact is it's important that this happens to students because classic example, maybe it materially improves their lives, maybe it makes their mental health better. So giving a reason why it impacts them in a good way, and that means it ties back to how you win the debate. Okay, so crafting points in terms of explaining the context, mechanisms, outcomes, and impacts. So at the top of every point should have a label. So what you want to do at the top of your page, so we've separated onto a new piece of paper from the introductory part of your speech. What you want to do then is bring in a label for the point. So it's just in one sentence, it concisely explains what the point is. So it's just like a topic sentence in an essay. So it just needs to be quite short and just accurately reflect what your point is about. So simple is almost always better. It is often something like benefits to students, benefits to teachers. So you're explaining how your side gets benefits to a certain group. They really will be more complicated than that, because if you're overcomplicating them, it's probably going to be quite confusing for the judge to interpret like what the outcome of that is. And also if it's more than one sentence, then you're wasting time on just a topic sentence, which is actually not proving the argument is true. So then after the label, so you've written one sentence at the top of your piece of paper, what you're going to do next is write a little bit of context underneath. So any setup, this is just any setup that frames your point and is required for your point to work. So by the end of the context, the adjudicator should understand what's happening in the world, specifically that's relevant to your substantive point. So what you should do here is work out what goes in the context. It's a matter of discretion. So think about what assumptions am I making for this point to work, what facts underpins this point, and what's relevant background to this point. So anytime you're thinking that something is true, this is when you want to bring in questioning of yourself. So, okay, I think this happens. Why do I think that this happens? If there's an assumption that your argument is relying on, this is where you need to fit it in. So just explaining the context of the debate. So maybe you think that your point is really relevant because of a current situation, right? Here's in the context, say, this point is really important. The impact of businesses is really important because we have COVID-19 right now, which changes the way that the world exists. So it really just helps the adjudicator think about the point in context in terms of how important it is, because if you give that context, it's more likely that they think it is important and they believe that it's going to actually make a difference or make a better impact on your side. So after you've explained the context, you've done a label, you've done a little bit of a paragraph of context. Now what you're going to do is mechanisms. So mechanisms are possibly the most important part of this speech, or part of the substantive point. What you want to do with them is explain the specific reasons why a point happens in the way that you say it will. So mechanisms prove a point. This is how you change a point from being assertive to justified. So I don't know if any of you do schools debating or have done schools debating. There's a massive tendency for kids to just say a sentence and then move on. What you need to do is say the sentence and then explain why the sentence is true. So separating out mechanisms is a really good way of showing different levels of analysis. So you could give mechanisms that work on different levels or work for different reasons or work for different groups of people. And all of them will help to come together to give lots and lots of reasons for the adjudicator to persuade them that your point is true. So what you want to do is brainstorm. Every time you come up with a point or a statement, brainstorm all of the mechanisms that you can. So brainstorm all of the reasons why a point is true. Say in a debate about schools, you have a point about benefits to students. You want to think of all the different reasons why you get the benefits to students, because that's going to make your point more convincing. And just as another note, every time you think of a different mechanism, make sure you're trying to number them, because it makes it easier for judges to follow which point is separate from another. So if you're just saying one continuous sentence of lots of different reasons, adjudicators is quite likely to miss some of those reasons because they haven't been able to follow the structure within your speech. If you number them, it means that they're more likely to get all of them written down so that they can remember them when it comes to the adjudication. Okay. Outcome, pretty simple, like I said before. It's just what happened as a result of your mechanisms. So it's quite intuitive. After you've come up with all of the reasons for why something is true, what happens if it is true? And then the impact is, why does it matter that your outcomes happen? So you're linking it back now to how you win the debate. So for example, if we impact lots of people's lives, therefore it's a bigger benefit and we win the debate. So you're linking it back to how the impact of your point, so the scale of it, the meaning of it, those kinds of things, how it links back to you guys being the more convincing team or the team that should win the debate. Okay, so now we're going to make a point together. So we're doing on the motion affirming this House regrets, so R means regrets, the privatization of space research / exploration projects. So let's all take a few minutes to jot down some ideas and any questions. So going back to the 5-minute brainstorm prompt ideas that we did earlier, we'll do 5 minutes of silent prep. You're allowed to discuss with each other. I'm not going to enforce the silent part, but just take a few minutes to think about the motion. What do the words mean? What are we arguing for? And why you should believe that we should regret the privatization of space research or exploration projects. Cool, so we'll come back at 5:30. Okay, it is 5:30 now, so I'm just gonna change out of the present mode in the slideshow, if it lets me. There we go. And I'll jot down everyone's ideas. I'll be the first speaker, but I'll give a chance for everyone just to, whatever you've got, throw it out there. I'll start with people that know how to make points. So Harper, what are your ideas?
Maybe it's bad because they put bad politics up there.
Definitely. Anyone else? Yes.
I think just ethically the point can be made that it takes up such a vast amount of money on, say, if we focus on Mars, while then there's poverty on Earth, and many issues on Earth that could be using that money.
Does anyone have any other thoughts? Aisha. Excellent. Yes.
And related to that one, it not only takes away money from people, but also contributes to pollution.
Nice. Any other ideas? Okay, we can just move through to some of the ideas that I came up with when I thought about this by myself. But these all factor into separate points that I came up with. So hopefully it makes sense when you see the things that I came up with. So these are some of the questions that I asked myself when I was in prep. So what does privatizing something do? Because that's a key word in the motion. What is different about that when you change that part? So if we lived in a world where we didn't privatize space travel, or space exploration and research, what would it look like? And why is that world then better? Because we're trying to regret the privatization part of space exploration projects. And then what does it mean to regret something in the debate? So what do I, as the affirming speaker or affirming team, have to prove to make the average reasonable person regret the fact that we privatize space exploration? Because that's what we're building towards. So coming up with different categories of points that would prove to the average reasonable person that privatization of space research is regrettable. And then also I asked myself, so what is the status quo? Do we have privatization? Do we have, what are some examples of private space companies that do research or exploration? So what examples can I then get from the status quo that support my points and make it more convincing to the adjudicator that I didn't just come up with that randomly and like that it actually is true? Okay, so here are some assumptions or things that to set up the debate, to make the debate, sorry, I'll go back to presenting mode now. Setups of things that we need to explain to make the debate work. So I think firstly, we need to kind of look at, well, if we regret space exploration, that must mean that I support the alternative, which is not privatized version. So the alternative to private companies having a monopoly on space is probably something like national governments hosting space programs. So NASA or the Chinese government having their own space program. So thinking about why it's preferable that we have that reality rather than like Elon Musk's SpaceX or I couldn't really think of any other examples. So forgive me, all of my examples are about Elon Musk. Second, what does privatization look like? As you can see, SpaceX comes into play here. Companies like SpaceX exploring ways to commercialize space, because that's something that private companies do, right? They like to commercialize things in a way that they can profit off of it. So I'll open the floor here. Does anyone else have any thoughts of things that we might need to put in here to explain the debate to make it work. Because this is an example of a motion where you don't really require a model because you're not changing anything, you're just regretting something. So you're trying to explain to the average reasonable person why it's regrettable that space exploration is private. So any thoughts? Okay, no worries. I feel like personally, I think I covered everything and said it, but I do have a tendency to assume that I'm always right in debating. Okay, looking at just some general points that I came up with, there are lots of other things in this debate that you could talk about, but here are the things that I came up with when I was preparing for this motion. So firstly, I think that there's a principle about why space should be a public good. So I'll explain what a principal point is later, but this seminar is probably more focused on practical points because there's a bias against principal points being like impactful, and also principal points are a little bit tricky. So we'll save that for the end and focus on practical points for the points of the seminar. So that 2 practical points that I came up with were, second point, why privatization has harms research and science ventures, and then third point of why privatization makes space inaccessible for the average reasonable person. So what we're going to do now is walk through that second point. So the first practical point of why privatization has harmed research and science ventures. So we're going to walk through that structure that we went through earlier. So the context for this point is that private companies like SpaceX are motivated by 2 things. Firstly, profit. They cannot continue to operate if they do not make money, meaning their business goes in whatever direction makes them money. This is different to like government space programs, right? Because they can just tax people to get the money from there. They don't have to collapse their entire business if their project fails or doesn't make enough money. They can just get a little bit more money from the taxpayer and keep going. So that means that they're likely to focus on things like commercialized space travel, hotels on the moon, that kind of thing. Second thing that they are motivated by is the personal interests of their executive. So if Elon Musk wants to send a Tesla to space, the company probably has to cater to that in some way. So the creative influence or the directing party that's telling SpaceX, okay, this is our next project, is motivated by profit and also motivated by the people at the top and what they care about. So cumulatively, altogether, this means that projects that they will pursue are unlikely to be the types of research that governments would do, because governments are motivated by different things. They're more likely to like look at things that would be involved in public good. So more research oriented, more looking at things that would benefit society in general. So it's likely that private companies, in contrast, will focus on commercial space travel and like pet projects of the CEO. And the evidence of that is that SpaceX does lots of weird things. So now moving into the mechanisms. So what you're trying to prove now is, why do these motivations, so the motivations that we've talked about in the context, why do the motivations of private companies harm space research and science ventures? So these are 2 reasons that I came up with. There are probably a lot more, and this is why it's really useful to have a team, because they'll have more ideas than one person. So 2 ideas that I came up with were, firstly, because private companies will then employ the leading scientists in the area and put them on commercial projects. So these projects don't really have much benefit to humanity. You can also prove why if a scientist was given a contract from a public company and a private company, why they're more likely to take the private job, because the private job probably pays more, because the private company has more money to throw around to put into their projects. So that means that that all of the scientists in the industry are likely to be put on these commercial projects. The second thing why motivations harm space research and science ventures is because conversation about space and travel comes dominated by private companies. I didn't write the rest of the sentence, but who are focused on more commercial ventures. So then the conversation that everyone's having in the news is about like hotels on the moon, rather than let's discover this new planet because it's really interesting for like science and research. So we're talking about commercial ventures, how we can somehow be involved in space travel, rather than the types of research that will create more progress for humanity. So then the outcomes of this are that firstly, government research projects cannot compete and therefore do not succeed, because the other team might try and prove, we think that privatization is good because it helps government ventures do their job better because they get the technology to transfer across. You're proving that that actually doesn't happen because government research cannot compete and don't succeed because A, they don't have the scientists to do the work, because the private companies have taken all of their people across to work on their commercial projects. All of the astronauts and all of the engineers are working on that hotel on the moon and not on NASA's new project. But B, people don't want to pay more taxes for the funding of the works that the government might do because they see no need for the government to do the kinds of work in space if that same thing can be done by other companies, so private companies that don't get funded by their taxpayer dollars. So that means that the government is not going to get the same level of funding that they otherwise would if private companies didn't exist. Governments would probably be able to keep getting money in their budgets, but also there's more likely that scientists are able to do the work for them. The second outcome of the mechanisms, though, is that space is then monopolized by the rich. So only rich people will be able to afford space flights or vacations to the moon because of the motivations of those people that were creating those ventures in the first place. So Elon Musk is focusing on projects like space travel or commercialized space travel. Those projects or those vacations are probably only going to be available to very, very rich people because he wants people who have lots of money to pay for that service so he can continue to make money in that project. So then the impacts of this, so why it's important and why those outcomes are significant in the debate and why it leads your team to victory is, firstly, it's important that research is not done on their side, in the side where privatization exists. So it's really important that this research is done because you get progress to humanity when you do kinds of like space research. A lot of crucial development that benefits a lot of people does not happen when we don't have this research being conducted. Second reason why space is inaccessible to the average person when it's privatized, because the government has incentives to make it cheaper, to make it more accessible to the everyday person, because that's the people that are controlling them, or in a democracy, those are the people that they have to serve. Privatized companies, though, are there to serve whatever makes them more money. So it's likely that their prices are going to be quite high, even if they are creating successful trips to the moon. But thirdly, the government will just invest less in their own space programs because of the reason that we told you about the discourse of people not wanting to talk about space unless it's about sending a Tesla into space. So that means that, this slide, that means that the government won't have as much money when it comes to budget time and Congress is trying to convince people, let's put more money into NASA. Everyone's going to be like, why? Why would we want to do that when SpaceX is already doing that kind of research? So why should the taxpayer have to pay for it when there's already companies that are doing similar things? So that means that you're having less research done overall, and the government isn't able to make an alternative program because of the reasons that we told you of the privatized company controlling or taking resources and money away. That means that it's regrettable that privatization is used in research and space exploration. Okay, so does anyone have any questions at the end of this point, or just any comments? It doesn't even have to be a question. I'll also check on the Zoom chat. I hope that helps to clarify how you walk through a point and what it actually looks like when you're explaining context and like the difference between mechanisms, outcomes, and impacts. That's something that I always found really confusing because I thought that they were all just the same thing. I hope it helps you see that they are more separate versions and an extension to help your argument develop. So just a general word on principles. Principles are also a good portion of case building. They will usually be when you are building a case, you've done your as a first speaker, you've done your introduction, you've done your setup, you've gone, okay, these are the three things that I'm going to talk about. You should usually talk about that point first because it will just give a little bit of context for the rest of the debate, and a bit of a lens of how the adjudicators should view the debate. So principles are used in debating as a way of proving that you should believe or support or regret or do something independent from its practical outcomes. So regardless of whether you think that Elon Musk having SpaceX has made really cool things happen or whether it has made bad things happen, here's a reason why you should regret privatization. So you should start with the context in terms of actually writing it as a point. You should start with the context of what the principle is and then move into why it matters, because it won't have the same kind of structure as a practical point will have, because it doesn't have the same practical outcomes. You're just supposed to support it because you principally or morally should believe it to be true. You still have to prove why people should support it though. So for example, in this debate, a principle might be why space should not be owned by anyone, or why it should not be privatized by companies that aren't controlled by the public. So the privatization of space exploration means that space is less accessible to the average person. Society values accessibility because it gives equal opportunity to people so that they can go on and access space, participate as like an astronaut, or find their own career in that industry. So just giving reasons why like the public supports similar principles. So you might want to talk about here, like we evidence of how we support accessibility as a value is in the reason why most countries have benefit systems, or those kinds of things, proving how we have similar things that exist. So if you support that, then you should also support this as a principle, and that space should not be owned by anyone. Generally in debating though, principles will become clear within the debate, but they're quite hard to craft in a way that are successful and win the debate. Generally, you won't win a debate on a principle. So that's why I would strongly suggest that you talk about lots of other practical outcomes within your case and not just explain one principle. Cool, so I'll just walk through some final tips and hopefully this clarifies any other questions that you might have. I'd always recommend that you remind yourself what you're trying to prove. So when you're walking through all of the steps that we walked through earlier, it can be quite difficult to, bring yourself to that next step. So every time that you've done something or you've written something down, you want to remind yourself, okay, if I don't know quite where I'm going from here, what am I trying to prove? And then you work backwards from that goal to how you get to that goal. So you're explaining, that's what all of the mechanism outcome impact structure is trying to get you towards. It's trying to help you have steps that you master in order to get to the goal of winning the debate. A second recommendation is every time you say a statement, even if you throw the whole structure out the window, if you're saying a statement in debating, make sure you're backing it up. So if you say a sentence, why is that sentence true? And why does that sentence matter in terms of the context for the rest of the debate? If you can't justify that in your head before you say it, maybe it's the wrong sentence and you should think of something else. Thirdly, structure is very important. So I would recommend that even if you don't get through every step, so if you can't quite think of some context, still try and think of some context and put it into your speech so that you have those individual points of structure. Structure is very important. So just like you lose marks in essays because the marker can't figure out what's going on, you'll lose marks from judges because they can't figure out what you're trying to prove. So if you're using a structure, it's easier for them to go, okay, well, they gave me 4 reasons why that's true. I remember those 4 reasons because they told me 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to then be more favorable towards them in my adjudication. Fourthly, though, just start simple, because if you're trying to do really complex things immediately, it can become quite hard to try and prove something. So just work on nailing the basics. You can start to do more advanced things like bringing in lots of examples or giving more mechanisms or giving really big impacts or big outcomes or linking things together once you've nailed the simple structure of context, mechanism, outcome, impact. A lot of debating is just quite simple. You're just trying to prove arguments are true. If you start there, and you can work towards more complicated things later. Otherwise, I'll open the floor to questions. Please let me know any questions that you may have. If you don't want to share them to the room, I will look in the Zoom chat. My DMs are also open. My name is Melissa Connolly. And also you can ask any members of the exec if they are your judges tonight, if you're signing up for club night. Yes, I'll open the floor for questions. Otherwise, if you don't have any questions, I strongly recommend signing up for club night so that you can have a little chance to put these into practice. If you are not ready to speak yet, that is fine. We also have options if you want to watch a debate or if you want to trainee. So training is where you watch a debate, but you're trying to judge it. And then you'll have an opportunity to explain to the actual judge in the room how you thought the debate happened. And then they can, explain how they saw the debate and how they compare and what kinds of reasons they saw the debate the way they did. So lots of opportunities to get involved. Also for people on Zoom, we're running hybrid club nights, so you are welcome to sign up and participate as well. Otherwise, we will have a little 10-minute break before the pizzas get here, and then it is time for club night to open. So I will see you all in a minute.